Welcome to myTRIAList Trial Talk, Voices of Experience.
The cancer that I was diagnosed with was first adenocarcinoma of the lung, and I was diagnosed in early April of 2020. I'm currently participating in a clinical trial, and it's a phase 1 clinical trial for targeted therapy for the mutation that my tumor has.
How did you learn about clinical trials?
I started off with taking some traditional chemo treatments, and that worked along with a immunotherapy treatment, and that worked for a little while. Then that stopped working, and then I went to a second line of traditional chemo that worked for a very short time, and then that stopped working. And the third line of the traditional chemo was not really a promising option for me. And however, at the same cancer center where I was being treated with traditional chemo, there were people working on various clinical trials. And my oncologist at the time suggested that I might be a candidate for one of these clinical trials, and so that I could have a conversation with the doctors from the clinical trial, the team of the clinical trial, which is what I did. And then it seemed that I would be a candidate.
How did you feel about clinical trials before enrolling in one?
I was not a fan. I'm also not a fan of traditional chemo, but in the clinical trial, my hesitation was, it just seemed like the concern was not really with my welfare, but rather with the pharmaceutical company's needs. So I was a little skeptical. And also, since the clinical trial I'm in is a phase 1 trial, it meant that there had been no human subjects, that I was going to be a subject, first of all, and that there had been no human subjects before. And that made me anxious to think that they were testing out drugs. Whoever they are, would be testing out drugs on me that they didn't know, that no one really knew what my response would be, if there would be horrible side effects. So I was anxious about it. But the bottom line is I didn't know anything about clinical trials. I'd never had cancer before. I'd never been in one before. And I didn't know what the side effects would be, just like the sponsors and just like my medical team. None of us knew what the effects would be, or if I would respond or not respond. So I thought, well, at least I can try. I can try and see, and then make a decision based on, once I have some actual information, as opposed to just an emotional response to an idea.
Why did you decide to enroll in a clinical trial?
The trial I'm in is a targeted therapy, and I'd read some things about targeted therapy, and if they worked, it seemed like an excellent solution, or maybe not a solution, but a treatment plan. So yeah, so I guess the real reason I decided to move forward is because I was out of options, and this is an option that was presented to me.
Did you face any barriers when deciding to enroll in the trial?
When I first heard about this particular clinical trial that I'm on now, this targeted therapy trial, it had just begun, and I had my first line of traditional chemo mixed with immunotherapy therapy drugs had stopped working, and I learned about this trial, but I couldn't. There wasn't at that point, there was only one person in the trial. Maybe only one person at my center in the trial, or in the United States in the trial, and it was tricky to get a spot. So it wasn't clear that I was going to be able to get a spot for months. So everyone involved suggested that I go ahead with the second line of traditional chemo. So after the second line, which I did, and then after that stopped working, I went back to the clinical trial people, and we reopened the discussion of me being part of the trial. And again, there was not really a spot, or it wasn't clear that there was when there would be a spot. It could be months, but I decided that at that point that I could wait months, that I didn't want to go up with a third line of traditional chemo, that I would wait my turn. And as it turned out, someone else who was hoping to be part of the trial was found to be ineligible for whatever reason. I mean, I knew nothing about that, except that a spot opened for me.
What was the clinical trial enrollment process like?
First, I had to sign a 23-page consent form, which felt like a lot of pages. But as it turned out, the legalese really boiled it down to about 2 pages of information. And I was nervous about that consent form, or just about the idea of signing a consent form, but I realized that I could leave the trial at any time. So, so that made it possible for me to join the trial, or to at least fill out this consent form. And then there were a lot of tests. There was a lot of medical tests. I don't even remember what they were now, but there was heart tests, there were lung strength tests, there were endless blood tests, there were maybe scans. It was a couple, I think there was it's a period of about 10 days, almost 2 weeks of testing, basically going in to see some doctor or some clinic and getting some kind of test. And I was fortunate that my health otherwise is pretty good, and that I was able to meet all the requirements. It was the challenge for me during that time was that I had decided that I decided that I had to be part of this, that I really wanted to be in this clinical trial. And that was anxiety provoking to imagine that I might not qualify for some reason that had nothing to do, like there was no practicing, there was no studying, there was just, it was, the qualifications had to do with my medical situation. And whether my lungs were strong enough, whether my heart was strong enough, and I don't even remember all what, but it was all things that were completely out of my control, the way so much is. And that was the trickiest part for me in terms of qualifying for this clinical trial.
Can you tell us about your clinical trial experience?
What's required of me to be on this trial, what's asked of me, is that I take some pills every day. It's right now I take 3 pills, and that's only because the dosage, they only make the pill in a certain dosages. So I need to take 3 to complete my dosage requirement, and it's every single day. And then at the moment now, I go into the office every 3 weeks. And the first thing that happens is I give blood. They draw blood. I don't give blood. They take blood, and then for blood tests, and I also give a urine sample for a urine test. And then I see the doctor or the team, some members of the team, and explain to them in minutia, how I've been in the last 3 weeks, if I've had any side effects, or if I've had anything else that's come up. And then every 9 weeks at this point, I go for some CT scans to see if there's been any growth or any metastasis. In the beginning, it was much more regimen, and I think the first time I was there all day long, and they took multiple EKGs, and I had to fast for 12 hours or something like that. I can't even remember. It was a year ago, but it was, and they were constantly checking my vital signs and watching me. And in the beginning, I would go every week. At first, it's a 3-week cycle, which seems arbitrary, but So the first cycle, I went every week. Second cycle, I went the first 2 weeks. And then the third cycle, the fourth cycle. And the fifth cycle, I think I went every first and second week. And I would have scans every 6 weeks. And now I progressed to this cycle of going in for a review once every 3 weeks and scans once every 9 weeks.
How did you find support throughout the clinical trial process?
I'm lucky. I feel like I'm very lucky that the team of medical team and personnel team at the cancer center and on the clinical trial group are very accessible, very human, and incredibly personable and helpful and willing to answer all my questions and, and be available by text or by email or by phone whenever I have any concerns. So that was really important to me.
How did you take care of your mental health throughout the clinical trial process?
From the very beginning, I thought, I have no idea how to do this. Like, I don't know how to have cancer. I can't figure this out. This is way too complicated for me. I'm going to need to get some help. So I reached out to a couple places and I got some therapy, some therapeutic counseling. And because I really didn't know how, I mean, I don't know how you have cancer. I don't know I didn't know how to even think about this or like how I should think about it, how I should feel about it, what I should do. So I started with seeing an individual therapist, one-on-one, and I joined a people with cancer and particularly people with lung cancer therapeutic group, so group therapy. So because I don't want to imagine that I can manage all this on my own. The other thing that I do is there are a bunch of social platforms where you can where I can update people as to what's going on with me medically or or emotionally. And so I do that. So in the beginning it was more frequent, and now it's every couple months or every other month, probably every other month. I post on one of these platforms exactly what's going on with me and what the prognosis is or what the diagnosis is or what the treatment is. And that way I can include people in this and I can get support, but I don't have to tell everybody everything all the time constantly. And people also don't have to worry about asking me what's going on with you. They can go to this site and find out what's going on with me and then reach out if they'd like.
What was one thing you were surprised to learn about clinical trials that you didn't know?
So I guess I didn't realize that they would keep so much, they would keep track of me, that it to the extent that they did, particularly in the beginning. So I've been on this trial, it'll be a year in a couple of weeks. In the very beginning, I had to, I mean, they explained that to me, but I didn't know this. I mean, I knew nothing. The truth is I knew nothing about clinical trials. I had to go into the center. I think the first week I had to go in several times, and I had to go every week, and then it was every other week, and now it's every 3 weeks.
Was enrolling in a clinical trial the right decision for you? Was there a moment you realized you had made the right decision?
Yeah, it was the right decision. It was excellent. I was you know, divine intervention as far as I could see. As I said before, it seemed like I was out of options. And within weeks, at the time when I just started to be symptomatic and I was having some wheezing and some coughing, and within days that subsided. And then I had a scan, I don't know, within 2-3 weeks, I guess, after starting the trial. And there had been almost 40% decrease in the amount of cancer in my size of tumors in my lungs. So right then I knew that that it was working, that it was a really good thing for me. Also, I was not suffering from I was tolerating the drugs really well. The first week after going back, I said something to my doctor about it. I imagine this is just all in my imagination, but I'm not coughing and I'm not wheezing, and I can't believe that it would work that quickly. And he said, well, yeah, actually it could work that quickly. So right then I guess that was the first time I thought, oh, I'm so grateful.
What advice would you give someone who is having a hard time deciding to enroll in a clinical trial?
If you're thinking about joining a clinical trial, making sure you creating a relationship with the team or seeing if you can have a relationship with the team is really essential. It's been really important to me.
How has cancer care helped you?
I found cancer care through Gilda's Club, and a friend of mine's stepmother had joined Gilda's Club a number of years ago when she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And so I contacted them, and then they told me about cancer cares. And so then I contacted them, and that was where I first had my first individual therapy counseling. And it was it was just exactly that. I had a wonderful counselor, it was enormously helpful. I felt really taken care of and heard and supported, and then that led to a cancer cares group that I'm currently in. It's a group therapy program for people with lung cancer.
What questions would you tell someone that is considering a clinical trial to ask their doctor?
What the trial is about, like what's the point of the trial, what phase it's at, what are they hoping to get, how the doctor feels about the trial, what they imagine the side effects will be.
How has the clinical trial impacted your quality of life?
Right before I started the clinical trial, I went on a vacation to Yellowstone where I was hiking and snowshoeing and cross-country skiing. But it seemed at that point that would probably be the last time I could do something like that, because the symptoms had started to develop and the disease started to progress. So that progression of the disease came to a fabulous screeching halt. And I'm in much better physical shape now in terms of my lungs are in better shape now than they were. But the impact has been overwhelmingly positive. I felt like I got my life back. Actually, that's what it felt like, that I'd all of a sudden got my life back and my health back when I started with this clinical trial. Also, the impact that being on a clinical trial has had on my life is that my hair's grown back. So one of my issues with traditional chemo was that I lost all my hair. And a person presumably can live a reasonable life without hair, but honestly, it was not great. It did not really work for me. I mean, I was bald. That was that. I was still alive, but I was bald. And now my hair is growing back. In fact, it's a little wonky right now, but I've actually had a haircut since my hair. This time last year I was bald. And I had come to accept the routine of the traditional chemo. Of my program involved an infusion every 3 weeks. And so I'd go in on a Monday, and then 3 weeks later I would go back in on a Monday, and 3 weeks later I would go back in on Monday, and I would have injection, chemo injected, an IV hooked up, and then I would sit there for this chemo. And I would come home, they would also give me some steroids and some other vitamin B, I think, and something else to help, and some anti-nausea meds, so that I would be okay for a day. And then the next day I would start to feel less okay. And by Wednesday, I would was laying on the couch feeling like someone had just sucked the life out of me, and like my life force was gone. And then Thursday I would start to feel a little stronger, but I felt the middle of that week was spent just laying there, not without the strength or the will to even read or to listen to music or to watch TV, anything. And the next day I would be able to get up and take my dog out for a walk, but very short walks. Luckily, I have support and people would come and help me with that sort of stuff. And I didn't want to eat by the end of the week, by Saturday. So I'd start on Monday. By Saturday, I would start to feel almost like myself again. Sunday, I would feel like myself again. And then the next week would be like I would be back in my life. And then the third week, I would be back in my life. And then it would start all over again. And I'd come to accept that it was tricky. I didn't like it, and I didn't know how, and it was hard to do, but I just accepted this was the pattern of my life now. And now that I'm on this clinical trial, that is absolutely not the case. It's no longer the case. Now every day is my day to live as I choose. I mean, once every 3 weeks, I've spent the morning or the afternoon or part of a day in the cancer center answering questions and getting blood tests taken. And, and that's what's asked of me now. That's the difficult part. It's such so much better, such an improvement over that. And I'd forgotten, I came to terms with it, but I'd forgotten how much I didn't like giving up a week of one of every 3 weeks out of my life. So now I have, and that's why I said that, in fact, I felt like immediately upon joining the clinical trial that I got my life back.